there are several concepts that he has gone over. One is culture as an idea of cultivation. Right? You cultivate, like you grow something in the soil. You use culture, right, which is the fertilizer. Right? And you use the soil to cultivate something, to grow something. So cultivation, like education, is a way of cultivating people. Right? So this is one idea of culture. The other is more like objects. Like objects of this process of cultivating people. When you cultivate human beings, right? Human beings begin to develop, generate processes of intellectual, spiritual, and aesthetic development. This is the first idea of cultivation, culture as cultivation. The second idea indicates culture as a particular way of life, whether of a people, of a period, a group, or humanity in general. Culture as a collection of everything that becomes a part of your everyday life. That's your culture. How Hong Kong people live their life, which is different from how people in Vienna live their life. That's culture. Now the third idea describes the works and practices and the things that comes out of this production or artistic activities. And this is the usual sense we understand culture nowadays. As music, as literature, painting, sculpture, architecture, theater, film, animation, cartoon, everything. The products of our cultural activity. So this is the more material objective, or material definition. The other is more a process. So you can go back and we will talk more about these together during the tutorials. So this is broad ideas about culture. It's a process of cultivation. It's also a way of life. And it's also the product of cultivation and ways of life. Very easy, right? So the other idea is the idea of the popular. How do we come to understand popular culture? Why is it popular and not something else? Ordinary people's culture, why is it called popular? This story I'm going to tell you in the process of the lecture, so you don't have to read it right now. Now the third idea that you need to really be concerned about in cultural policy is how do we understand art? What is art? Now let's turn to that in the last page, the last two pages of your readings, page 40. So it's not according to numerical order, it's according to the order I refer to them. So if you find second last sheet, page 40, that's where we talk about art. Now in the Western culture, during the medieval times, right, 12th, 13th, 14th century, 11th century, at that time, the arts refer to anything you do that you need to use your intellect and to train through some skills. Right? So the 7 arts were the liberal arts. So what we call the liberal arts education nowadays, it includes the following. Grammar, you need to learn language. Logic, you need to know how to think properly. Rhetoric, how to express yourself. Arithmetic, how to calculate. Geometry, how to understand the world spatially. Music, one of the arts of expression. Astronomy, to understand geography and the human relation to the cosmos. And these are all the arts. That was arts in the medieval times. And later, they have gradually developed to a differentiation between artists and artisan. Now that's an arbitrary new development. Later on, a few centuries later, 17th century, the artisans are the people who can do something very well. They have some skills, who can make the same sculpture 5,000 times and make it very, very well. Who can make a piece of furniture with a lot of skills. But that was an understanding, and during why 17th century? Because it's towards the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when people make copies of the same thing very quickly and with a lot of skill. And you call the artisan as a person who has the skill to make reproduction copies. But they do not assume that the artisan need to have a lot of creativity, imagination, a lot of all these things. They can take instructions and execute instructions, and that is a skillful artisan. And the artist is the one with the creativity, who breaks the envelope, who thinks of something new, who has creativity, and so forth. This idea of this division only happens when the Industrial Revolution began. Now, and we have to ask whether this is a very good way of defining things, because you can see a lot of artisans actually very, very creative. And people need to have a lot of creativity to design new tools to do something, to find a new way of doing something extremely well, right? And in social science, you have people who know about not just your factory, right? Original engineering, and manufacturing with your own original engineering that produces something very well. That's also R&D. That's also creativity. It's not just not just developing a product, but also developing a very good way of making the product. And also creativity can be broadly understood, right? Sometimes people think only a painter and a musician has creativity. But in Hong Kong, there are a lot of things that requires a lot of creativity. Food, right? The culinary skills of Hong Kong. Hong Kong food is extremely creative. Hong Kong used to have a very, very, very creative fashion industry. There are lots of things. Students here are pretty creative and finding ways to spend less time and getting higher grades, so on and so forth. You're very, very good at that. All these needs creativity. All sorts of human endeavor. If you want to do it well, you need creativity. So this kind of division, Industrial Revolution kind of mentality, is something we need to give a second thought about. Okay? Maybe we need both to be good artists and artisans, and they should not be two separate things. And nowadays, when we are moving towards knowledge economy and creative economy, we are going back to a new integration of skills. And we're no longer in a stage where division of labor would give us the best advantage. Because if you still continue to use division of labor, and I specialize in this thing, you're not going to get employed all your life, because skills are changing so fast, especially when it's computer skills or whatever. Skills are upgrading so fast. If you just learn a skill, you'll be obsolete 2 years later. So nowadays, we need to integrate again, to be creative as well as skillful, and to be so creative that we can actually learn to operate ourselves before we become obsolete, and to find new ways of survival in a globalized world. If you compete on skills, you compete on cheap labor. If two cities have the same skills, those people who ask for cheaper salary will get the job. So you compete down to the bottom. Everybody gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But that's not a very clever idea. So we need to understand creativity quite differently nowadays. And we need to be a little different from the Industrial Revolution kind of mentality, because we are becoming more and more a post-industrial city.